came from a family of real estate tycoons. He came from generational wealth, and his parents sent him here to the US when he was only in middle school. My family is rich, but we aren't wealthy like my husband's family, where they have sustainable and lasting wealth throughout generations. My husband's family had companies that were passed down from as late as his great-grandparents. Throughout my whole life, my parents have always disapproved of the men I dated because of their background. Everything always went well until they brought up the question about their occupation and their family's background. I understand that they just want to make sure that the man I end up marrying can take care of me, but it's getting absurd. I met my husband at my university, and we clicked off right away. I wanted to become a lawyer, while my husband was at school to just have a degree under his name. By the time I graduated and became a lawyer, my husband opened up his own small coffee shop near our area. My parents started finding out that I'm currently dating someone and invited my husband and me for dinner at a high-end restaurant. I told my husband that we didn't have to, and I brought up the fact that they were judgmental people. My husband smiled and told me that he doesn't mind and that he will try and do whatever he can to win my parents over. When my husband and my parents first met, everything went fine. It wasn't until an hour later into the conversation when my dad brought up the question of what he did for a living. My husband told my dad that he owned a small coffee shop. My dad scoffed and said, "So you expect to date my daughter with a low income?" I cut off my dad and told him to stop. My husband responded and told my parents that he was making a decent income from his store because of the college students that go there. My mom then joined the conversation and said, "Well, we always imagined our daughter to end up marrying into a wealthy family, and I'm just going to be honest and say that this relationship isn't going to work out." My husband smiled and calmly said, "So what do you guys do for a living?" My dad responded proudly and said that he became a lawyer in his late 20s and joined one of the largest firms on the West Coast. My husband asked for his law firm's name, and my dad responded. My husband's face lit up and said, "Oh, that's my uncle's law firm." My dad looked at him confused and asked what my husband meant. My husband told him that his uncle was one of the founders of that firm and used the inheritance his grandfather gave him to start it up. My dad, still looking confused, looked at him and said, "Well, that can't be right. There's no way a small coffee shop owner like you is related to the CEO of the firm I work for." My husband smiled again and said, "Would you like me to talk to him? Maybe give him a word about how you judged me and looked down on me." Both my parents laughed at his face and thought that my husband was bluffing. I stepped in and called them out on their rude behavior. I told them that not everything is about money, and for once to let me date and marry someone who I wanted. My dad argued back and told me that in order to sustain our family's future, it is my job as their daughter to do what they say and marry the person they choose. They looked at my husband and told me that I shouldn't date someone like him. My dad started getting up and said that this dinner was a waste of time. He ranted about how he felt insulted and angry that my husband even claimed that he was related to his boss, even though my husband came from a poor family. Both my parents left the restaurant, and I went home with my husband, crying. My husband comforted me throughout that night, and the next day my husband started trying to call his uncle. I told my husband to let it go, and that he had nothing to prove to them. I told my husband that I just wanted to cut ties with them and continue living our lives together. For the next 2 to 3 years, we lived our lives peacefully together. He still owns his coffee shop, and I've been working for the same law firm for about a year before I left my last one. That's when my parents arrived at our house unexpectedly in the middle of the night and asked to make amends with us. I wanted to shut my door as soon as I saw them, but my husband came in and welcomed them inside our home. I had a talk with my husband and asked him why he let my parents in after all they did to him. My husband told me that even though my parents were judgmental about him, they were still my parents, and that he knew deep down that I wanted them to get along. We sat my parents down, and my husband asked how they were and how life had been for the past few years. My dad started boasting about how he got a promotion in the law firm and that he's making a lot more than he did in the past few years. My dad asked how my husband's little coffee shop was going, and my husband said that they were stable. My mother joined the conversation and told me that they found someone that was suitable for me. I almost flipped out when I heard her say that, but my husband held my hand. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I'm already married to my husband." My father then stepped in and said that they can get all the divorce papers ready and that the person they found was someone under his management who would take his position one day. I could tell that my husband couldn't handle it anymore, and I just let him talk. My husband cut off my parents and told them that he was nothing but respectful to them and that he was tired of their behavior. My husband continued ranting about how all they talk about is money when he had more money than both of them combined. That's when my dad started laughing and said, "You have more money than both of us." My husband, with a blank stare, looked at them and said, "Do you want me to prove it?" My parents started laughing hysterically, and my dad said, "I would love you to prove it. I'm actually curious how much is in your bank account, if I'm being honest," my dad replied as my husband was about to pull out his phone. I grabbed his hand and told him that it's okay if he didn't want to, but my husband told me that he had enough of the disrespect towards him, even though he has shown nothing but kindness to my parents. My husband looked at my parents and asked which bank account they wanted to see. My dad scoffed and asked him why he needed multiple bank accounts when he doesn't make much. Before my dad could keep talking, my husband flipped his phone and showed $27 million inside his checking account. My dad, confused, grabbed the phone and started refreshing the screen. My husband asked my dad if they even wanted to see the monthly transactions he gets from his family's rental properties around the country. My dad was completely speechless, and my husband went on about his family and how they own shopping malls, apartment buildings, and plazas. My husband said, "Your daughter stopped me from calling my uncle and stopped me from having you fired at your job. But I think I'm going to go ahead and make a call after this." My dad's smile faded away, and I could tell both him and my mom were embarrassed. I went ahead and ended the conversation and asked them to leave our house. As soon as they left, my husband and I looked at each other, and I told my husband to let it go and we should move on from this situation. My husband agreed, but the next day, I got a call from my dad yelling at me, telling me that my husband and the guy they were trying to get me to marry were fired and released from their jobs. My father continued yelling at me through the phone, and I had enough and told them to never contact me again. I was hurt because, after all, they are my parents and the people who raised me, but I will not tolerate any of this behavior. Update: I'm so thankful for the support I have gotten from everyone. My husband and I moved to Texas about a couple of years ago and now live happily with 2 beautiful daughters. It sucks that my daughters will never meet their grandparents from my side, but I am grateful that they have 2 wonderful grandparents who love them from my husband's side. A lot of people are asking for my husband's family's name so they can search it up, but my husband told me to keep everything private, and I hope you guys can respect that. No, I haven't contacted my parents since they have tried, but I know they aren't going to change.